Throughout the history of warfare, there have been many great military strategies. But what happened in Constantinople on the night of April 23rd, 1453, was truly beyond imagination. A strategy so bold, so unbelievable, that people are still talking about it, even hundreds of years later. Imagine this: if you were a Roman emperor, you had sealed off your city's entire sea route with a giant iron chain, one that had long been considered impossible to break through. Then, when morning came, you walked to the city walls and saw something that made you freeze in shock. 70 enemy warships were already inside your harbor. Even though the iron chain was still intact, it had not been destroyed, it had not been cut, it had not been breached, because those ships did not come from the sea, they came over the mountain. And even harder to believe, all of it was done in a single night. Who was this young man, only 21 years old, who refused to accept the word impossible? And how was it possible, in an age when human technology was still so limited, for a massive naval fleet to be moved through a forest, across steep hills, in just a matter of hours? Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Dear friends of Salami Islam Stories, in this video, we will witness one of the most dramatic moments in Islamic history. A single night that changed the course of world history. The night when Sultan Mehmed II made warships climb a mountain. To understand why Sultan Mehmed II had such a strong determination, we must return to his childhood in the city of Edirne. Young Mehmed was not a prince who grew up surrounded by luxury and comfort. From a very young age, his father, Sultan Muhammad II, placed great hopes on his shoulders. He was raised with discipline, trained with knowledge, and prepared to lead a great empire. But there was one person who shaped young Mehmed's character more than anyone else. He was not a military commander, nor was he a nobleman of the royal court. Instead, he was a great Islamic scholar, highly respected in his time, Sheikh Shamsuddin. Sheikh Shamsuddin did not only teach Islamic law, Quranic interpretation, or the art of warfare. He was shaping the mindset of a future conqueror. Almost every afternoon, the teacher would take young Mehmed for a walk along the shore, and from there, he would point toward the west, toward a great city famous throughout the world at that time, Constantinople, a magnificent city that had been considered impossible to conquer for centuries. And there, Sheikh Shamsuddin would always repeat a prophecy, one that had lived in the hearts of Muslims for centuries. A noble prophecy spoken by Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, more than 800 years earlier. Constantinople will surely be conquered. What a wonderful leader its conqueror will be, and what a wonderful army will be, that army. For young Mehmed, that prophecy was not just a story from history, or a promise to be heard and then forgotten. No, those words lived in his heart. He felt as if he had been given a great calling, a mission that he was meant to fulfill himself. From that moment on, Constantinople was no longer just a city. It became a destiny that he would one day claim with his own hands. Year after year passed, until finally, Mehmed succeeded his father, Sultan Muhammad II, and ascended to the throne. He was only 19 years old, still very young, and because of that, many rulers across Europe underestimated him. They believed this young man was not yet mature enough to lead a great empire. Some were even convinced that the Ottoman Sultanate would weaken under his rule. But they did not realize young Mehmed had not taken the throne to live a life of comfort as a sultan. He carried a greater purpose, a single ambition that had been growing in his heart since childhood, to fulfill the prophecy of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. At that time, Constantinople was the capital of the Eastern Roman Empire, better known as the Byzantine Empire. It was no ordinary city. Constantinople was a center of power, a center of trade, and a symbol of Roman greatness for centuries. The city even carried a title that struck fear into the hearts of many armies, the unconquerable city. And that title was not given without reason. For hundreds of years, more than 20 great armies had attempted to besiege the city, including forces from the Umayyad Caliphate and the Abbasid Caliphate. But every one of them failed. Constantinople seemed truly impossible to bring down. Geographically, the city was protected like a natural fortress. Its shape resembled a triangle, and each side was defended by barriers that were extremely difficult to overcome. On the western side, the land approach, stood the legendary Theodosian walls, a massive triple-layered fortification with towering watchtowers overlooking every enemy movement. In front of the walls lay a wide water-filled moat, reaching depths of up to 10 meters. For many kingdoms of that era, breaking through these walls from the front was considered nearly impossible. To the south, Constantinople was protected by the Sea of Marmara. Its powerful currents made it difficult for enemy ships to maintain a steady course as they approached. A single mistake could leave them exposed to the Byzantine coastal defenses. And to the north lay a long and narrow inlet known as the Golden Horn, a natural harbor that played a crucial role in the city's defense. Sultan Mehmed II understood one important truth. No matter how strong a fortress might be, every fortress has a weak point, and Constantinople's weakness lay on its northern side, along the sea walls that faced the Golden Horn. Unlike the western walls, which were thick, powerful, and extremely difficult to break, the northern defenses were much thinner and far less formidable than those on the landward side. Mehmed realized that if the Ottoman fleet could somehow enter the Golden Horn, the Byzantine defenses would be divided. They would be forced to split their forces and defend against attacks from two directions at once, and that would be the best opportunity to bring down Constantinople. But Byzantine Emperor Constantine XI was no fool. He knew very well that the Golden Horn was the most vulnerable point of his city. That was why, at the entrance to the Golden Horn, the Byzantines installed a massive barrier, one that had forced armies across the world to abandon any hope of entering the harbor. A giant iron chain, not an ordinary chain. It was forged from heavy iron, with links nearly half a meter in length. Each link was so large, it was almost the size of a human body. The chain stretched across the water, from the walls of Constantinople to the district of Pera. Massive wooden floats were placed beneath it to keep the chain suspended above the surface, and any warship that attempted to break through it would be destroyed instantly. The Golden Horn was completely sealed. The Great Siege finally began in early April 1453. The Ottoman army arrived with something the world had never seen before, a giant cannon known as the Basilica, a massive super cannon built by an engineer named Urban. It was so enormous that moving it required dozens of oxen and hundreds of soldiers, and when it fired, it could launch a gigantic stone projectile weighing hundreds of kilograms directly at the walls of Constantinople. Its roar shook the ground. Thick black smoke filled the air. Cracks began to appear across different sections of the city's walls, but Constantinople still did not fall. Day after day passed. Week after week passed, and every time the Ottoman cannons managed to tear down a section of the wall during the day, thousands of people from the city would come out at night. They carried wood, earth, and stone. Then they rebuilt the damaged walls before sunrise. It was as if the city could not be broken. The peak of that frustration finally came on April 20, 1453. That day, 4 large ships from Christian Europe appeared on the horizon. 3 came from Genoa and 1 from Sicily. They carried food supplies, wheat, weapons, and reinforcements for the Byzantines. For Constantinople, the arrival of these ships was like a ray of hope in the middle of the Ottoman siege. Sultan Mehmed immediately ordered his fleet into action. Hundreds of small Ottoman galleys were deployed to intercept them before they could reach the Golden Horn, and soon a brutal naval battle erupted. From the shoreline, Sultan Mehmed II watched everything unfold with his own eyes. He saw how the European relief ships, much larger than the Ottoman vessels, gradually began to push the Ottoman fleet back. The situation grew more chaotic. Waves crashed against the ships. The shouts of soldiers mixed with the sound of wood smashing against wood. And in the midst of that chaos, one of the most emotional moments in Ottoman history took place. As he watched his fleet begin to lose the battle, Sultan Mehmed II rode his horse into the sea. Deeper and deeper, the waves soaked his clothes and his cloak. From atop his horse, he continued shouting orders to his admiral, Baltahlu Suleiman Bey, but it was already too late. The European relief ships had successfully broken through the Ottoman blockade. For a brief moment, the giant chain guarding the Golden Horn was lowered, allowing them to enter the harbor. Then, the chain was raised once again, and the Golden Horn was sealed shut. That night, a deep gloom settled over the Ottoman camp. The army's morale fell to its lowest point. From the distance, the sounds of celebration could be heard from inside Constantinople. Laughter, cheers, and the ringing of Byzantine victory bells echoed all the way to the Muslim camps. It was as if they were mocking the Ottoman defeat at sea. Many soldiers began to lose hope. They understood that as long as the Golden Horn chain remained in place, Constantinople seemed almost impossible to breach, and the situation grew even more difficult when several senior advisors of the empire began to lose confidence. Led by the Grand Vizier, Kandali Halil Pasha, they urged Sultan Mehmed to end the siege. In their view, the situation had become too dangerous. If a major European relief force truly arrived, the Ottoman army could face a devastating disaster. That was why they urged the Sultan to withdraw and return home before it was too late. Inside his silent command tent, Sultan Mehmed II was facing one of the hardest moments of his life. The defeat at sea had struck him deeply. He had only recently taken the throne. He was still very young, and now, before the eyes of the world, the Ottoman fleet had been driven back. If this siege failed, it would not only destroy his reputation, it would not only crush the hopes of his army, it could also bring an end to a dream that Muslims had carried for more than 800 years. The tent was filled with silence, only the sound of the wind and the flicker of a small flame in the corner could be heard. Then, in the middle of that silence, someone slowly stepped inside. Sheikh Shamsuddin, the elderly teacher, looked at his student calmly. He knew that the burden on the young Sultan's shoulders was heavier than the war itself. The great scholar walked closer and gently placed a hand on Sultan Mehmed's shoulder. Then, in a calm voice, yet filled with certainty, he said, "O Sultan, never doubt, the promise of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, is the truth. If every path before you has been closed by your enemies, then find a new path, one that no one in history has ever taken before." The words of his teacher struck directly into Sultan Mehmed's heart. In an instant, the hope that had nearly faded began to burn once again. The young Sultan slowly rose to his feet. He walked toward the large table before him, where a map of Constantinople lay spread out. He studied it in silence. This time, his eyes were no longer fixed on the sea or the giant iron chain that sealed the Golden Horn. Instead, his gaze shifted to the north, to a region of steep hills covered with dense forests, the hills of Galata, a rugged area partly controlled by the Genoese colony. And there, a daring idea began to take shape in his mind. Sultan Mehmed realized that if the sea route had been completely blocked by his enemy, then he would not attack through the sea. He would move his ships across the land, around the hills of Galata, and lower them directly into the Golden Horn. In other words, Sultan Mehmed II was about to make his fleet climb a mountain. By the standards of the 15th century, the plan sounded completely insane, almost impossible. The land route stretched for nearly 3 kilometers across steep hills, rising ground, and dense forests that were extremely difficult to cross. Even under normal circumstances, moving a single small ship over land could take days. But Sultan Mehmed was not planning to move just one ship. He intended to move 70 warships, Fustas and Taradas, medium and large warships equipped for battle and weighing many tons, and all of it had to be completed in a single night. But then, how could people in the 15th century possibly carry out such an unbelievable plan? This is where the Ottoman talent for logistics began to shine. The moment the idea was formed, Sultan Mehmed moved into action. He summoned his finest engineers, skilled craftsmen, and thousands of selected Ottoman soldiers. Everything was organized in secret. There were no loud commands, no grand announcements, because this operation had to remain completely hidden. Not a single Byzantine spy could be allowed to discover what Sultan Mehmed was preparing. This massive operation was not carried out recklessly. The Ottoman army planned every detail with great precision. They combined the ingenuity of ancient engineering with extraordinary military discipline. And this secret operation was carried out in 3 crucial stages. The first stage was to create a path. Thousands of Ottoman soldiers moved quietly into the forests of Galata. They cut down large trees, cleared narrow passages, and leveled the steep hillsides. Little by little, they created a temporary route through the forest, wide enough for warships to pass. Once the route was ready, they moved on to the next stage. The large trees that had been cut down were shaped into round wooden logs. These logs were then laid side by side along the ground, forming a giant track. Their purpose was to allow the hulls of the ships to move and slide across them, much like rolling wheels. But even that was not enough. The Ottoman ships were still incredibly heavy. And this is where one of the most important secrets of the operation came into play. Sultan Mehmed ordered supplies of olive oil, butter, and animal fat from the army's kitchens to be gathered. The fats were melted in large cauldrons. Then they were spread across the wooden tracks and beneath the ships themselves. There was one goal: to make the surface as slippery as possible, so the massive vessels could be pulled across the land with as little friction as possible. Time continued to pass, and at last, the decisive night arrived. The night of April 21, leading into April 22, 1453. The air was cold, the sky was dark, with no moonlight, as if nature itself was helping to conceal Sultan Mehmed's secret operation. Under the cover of darkness, the Ottoman army began one of the most daring military operations in world history. But Sultan Mehmed understood that if even the slightest suspicious sound came from the hills of Galata, the Byzantines might discover the plan. That was why he prepared a brilliant diversion. The giant Ottoman cannons facing the western land walls were ordered to keep firing throughout the night, even more intensely than usual. The thunderous blasts, the flashes of fire lighting up the night sky, all of it was deliberate. A distraction designed to hide the sounds of the secret operation in the hills of Galata. The creaking of wood, the grinding of iron pulleys, the footsteps of thousands of soldiers, and the groans of hundreds of oxen were slowly swallowed by the roar of the Ottoman cannons. One by one, the Ottoman warships began to move uphill from the shores of the Bosporus toward the hills of Galata. Their weight was enormous. Many weighed dozens of tons. Hundreds of oxen were used to pull them. Meanwhile, thousands of elite Janissary soldiers stood along the route, hauling massive ropes through a system of wooden pulleys. And at that moment, it was as if the world was witnessing something impossible. Sultan Mehmed gave an unusual order. The sails were to remain fully raised, even though the ships were traveling across land, not sailing at sea. At first, the command seemed strange, but Sultan Mehmed had a reason. He was using nature itself to his advantage. That night, strong winds were blowing from the Bosporus toward the land. The wind struck the Ottoman sails, creating an extra push, not a powerful one, but enough to ease the burden on the thousands of men struggling through the darkness. And that was not all. To keep the soldiers focused and prevent fear from spreading in the darkness of the forest, the Meta military drummers and Ottoman trumpeters remained standing on the decks of the ships. Even as those ships moved across the land, they played steady war rhythms, keeping every soldier marching in unison, like parts of one giant machine. Every second was a gamble between success and disaster. If a single rope snapped or a single log slipped out of place, a massive warship could slide backward down the hill, crushing the soldiers behind it. And yet, their unwavering faith and complete trust in Sultan Mehmed kept the Ottoman forces moving forward without hesitation. Slowly, they climbed higher and higher through the dark forests, across the steep hills, until at last the warships began descending through the valleys toward the calm waters of the Golden Horn. As dawn broke on April 20, 1453, and the first light of morning touched the skies above Constantinople, world history changed forever. The morning mist slowly lifted from the Golden Horn, and when the Byzantine guards looked toward the water, they froze in disbelief. They could not believe what they were seeing. 70 Ottoman warships were already inside the harbor, anchored in formation, directly behind the city's defenses. And yet, the giant iron chain of the Golden Horn remained locked in place, completely intact. Within moments, panic began to spread throughout the fortress. Emergency bells rang out. Soldiers rushed across the city walls. Shouts of alarm echoed everywhere. No one could understand how the Ottoman fleet had appeared inside the harbor. Some even believed it was impossible. The situation grew even more chaotic as the news spread through Constantinople. People poured out of their homes. They saw the Ottoman ships in the distance and realized one terrifying truth. Sultan Mehmed's forces were now behind them. From that day forward, the morale of the Byzantine defenders began to crumble. The defenses that had once focused entirely on the western land walls were now forced to divide their strength. They had to defend the northern sea walls as well, which were far more vulnerable. And that was exactly what Sultan Mehmed had wanted from the very beginning. Day after day passed, and the siege grew more brutal. The Ottoman cannons continued to pound the walls of Constantinople without pause. Food supplies inside the city began to run low. Exhaustion, fear, and despair slowly spread throughout the Byzantine Empire, until finally, in the early hours of Tuesday, May 29, 1453, the final assault began. The sky was still dark when the thunder of the Ottoman cannons once again shook the earth. Wave after wave of Muslim soldiers advanced toward the city walls. The battle was fierce, the cries of warriors, the clash of steel, and the sound of Allahu Akbar. Amid the chaos, the last Byzantine emperor, Constantine XI, refused to flee. Instead, he chose to enter the battlefield alongside his soldiers. The emperor fought until his final breath. And on that day, the Eastern Roman Empire, which had stood for more than 1,000 years, came to an end. The Ottoman forces broke through the city's defenses. One gate after another fell under their control, and slowly the Ottoman banners rose above Constantinople. For the first time in history, the city that had been considered unconquerable for centuries had finally fallen to Muslim rule. Sultan Mehmed then entered Constantinople alongside his army. The young ruler, only 21 years old at the time, had finally fulfilled the great promise that had lived in his heart since childhood. The prophecy of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, had become a reality, and from that day on, the world would remember him by a legendary title, Mehmed the Conqueror. Dear friends of Selami Islam Stories, the legendary story of the ships that climbed a mountain teaches us a powerful lesson for our lives today. For those who truly trust in the promises of Allah and hold on to a great vision, the word impossible is often nothing more than a fear held by those who give up before they even try. Mehmed the Conqueror proved that when every path seems closed, there is always another way for those who dare to think, dare to struggle, and never stop placing their hope in Allah. So, when your life feels stuck, when your dreams seem too far away, and when every road ahead appears to be blocked, do not give up. Remember the story of Mehmed the Conqueror. If the sea is sealed by chains, then build your own path, even if it means climbing a mountain and crossing a dark forest in the middle of the night. If you enjoy Islamic history stories like this, please support Selami Islam Stories by leaving a like, sharing your thoughts in the comments, and subscribing so you won't miss more extraordinary stories from Islamic history. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.